Hello. Right now I'd like to talk about playing one of my favorite pieces in the band literature. It's the solo in the march movement of the Holst Second Suite in F for military band. You've heard me play the piece if you've listened to my YouTube recordings, but here's what I think the melody should sound like. Now, it sounds fairly easy, and it really isn't very hard. Certainly not to play the notes. More difficult, though, is to play it with musicality, and also to project it in all cases so the audience can hear it. Now, let me start the piece again, and I'll stop when I have something to say. Right there. So, that middle note is often lost when people play it, because they're thinking about the first note and the last note of that three-note passage. They play it like that. There's no weight to the middle note. You probably heard it on this recording, but if there were an audience out there, if it were a large hall, and with a little bit of the band still behind me to cover up some of my notes, it'd be very hard to hear that one. So we need to put air through that, which is a concert A or B in treble clef, through that middle note, just as we did the first and third. In slow motion, that's what you want to do, is try to balance those three notes. So that middle one speaks out. I'll go on from there now. Something else to say. In many places, we'll have a half note that's articulated to another half note. In this room, it's easy to hear the articulation almost no matter how I do it. If I use my tongue at all, you'll probably hear it. When you're in a concert hall, there's reverberation, echo, out in the hall, and those things can get covered up rather easily. So we need to separate just a little bit more, but not necessarily by shortening the note, the preceding note. So I wouldn't play. That's not necessary and not very musical. What I do instead is to let my air taper the first note a little bit and then pulse the air again on the second note. I'm not using more tongue than I would otherwise. I'm just using more air from down here to give that note a little more presence. This time I'll do it without using my tongue at all. So I can still get the extra sound out for that note so it can be heard in the hall. I'll go on now. So within that first long phrase, there are two short phrases. Is the first one. In each case, you want to lead to the end of those sub-phrases. So in the first place, D, 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 down to that F, G in treble clef. You want to pull the audience down there with you to that bottom note. And by the same token, when you get to the last part of the upper phrase, dee, 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 da, dum, those quarter notes should lead right to that whole note. Put them together. So we've created a couple points of interest. It's not just this pretty melody. It has something more to touch at your heartstrings, we hope, if you're listening to it. In any case, it brings more life to the melody. The second phrase starts this way. So once again, we want to lead to that last note of the subphrase. The next subphrase has that same issue we talked about on the very first pickups. It's got that passing eighth note that has to be clear. I'll play that second long phrase. As we go on, once again, the problem with the passing note. This time it's a diatonic leading through it rather than an arpeggio. We're not going, instead we're going. But still it needs a little presence to make sure it speaks to the audience. Now those three half notes are particularly hard to get out to the audience. They're in the lowest part of that solo. Not very low in the horn, but still down in the middle range, lower middle range. And if you don't add a little pulse with your air, they're not going to come out. Just this approach will not probably get them out to an audience in an echoey hall. If I just slap them with my tongue through there, again, you'll hear it on this recording pretty well, I suspect. But in a hall with a lot of resonance, which really helps, it'll make it sound great if the hall has resonance, but you don't want to lose those little subtleties. So once again, you pulse the air. So here's that phrase, and I won't use my tongue on those three notes. I'm just pulsing it with the air. Adding a little bit of tongue, just for clarity, helps. So you need some tongue in there. Just don't let the tongue do all the work. Let your air support it. And once again, we have two subphrases, so that was the end of the first one. The second half of that is much like the second half of the first long phrase, where we're leading to the final note with those quarter notes. And then the last phrase. Once again, two phrases, each of which leads to its end, two subphrases, and then the long phrase. So in all those cases, I'm separating just enough between the subphrases to add a little point of interest, but not making it sound like I've stopped and restarted. Here's the whole thing again. Again, none of the tips I just gave you are about playing the notes, just getting the notes out. They're about making sure the audience hears them, first of all, and secondly, to make sure they sound like music. So I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for listening.